Okay, folks, here we are starting our last real kind of unit of the year. This one is going to be mostly about World War II or the build up to World War II, and a little bit about the Cold War and stuff that happened afterwards. So, generally, the time frame we're talking is about 1939 and 1950, though we're going to go a little bit earlier than 1939 and a little bit later than 1950. But, World War II pretty much happens largely within that time frame. So that's what we're going to focus on here. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the buildup to World War II and what was the state of these European countries in the years following World War One. All right, so we'll get right to it. Okay, so one thing you have to understand is what is the status of Germany in the 1920s? Well, we already know a couple things. We already know it's not good. We already know that World War One was particularly harsh on Germany, and now they're in the position of having to deal with all the war reparations and problems that come with trying to manage your country when you've got infrastructure issues, you've got problems with um, the reparations that you owe to other foreign governments because of the Treaty of Versailles. They've been forced to pay. So Germany's in a really tough spot when the 1920s comes around. Okay, so because of the harsh war guilt clause, remember that the country that started the war is responsible for paying for reparations afterward. Because of the harsh war guilt clause of the Treaty of Versailles, TOV, Treaty of Versailles, Germany's economy fell into a serious depression in the early 1920s. Now, we know about the Great Depression in the United States. We've all learned about it many times, probably. The depression that Germany experienced during the 1920s was substantially worse, about as bad as any economic downturn you could ever imagine. In fact, by 1923, the inflation rate in Germany, the inflation rate in 1923 at one point rose to over 4 trillion percent. So let's talk about inflation for a second. Basically, inflation has to do with the value of money, like the individual dollar. Okay, like if you ever go to a foreign country, you exchange American money for foreign money, and it's not the same amount. That's because that country has a different inflation rate than we do in the United States, so their money might actually be worth more or less than our money in the U.S. Okay, how does inflation happen? Well, inflation rates to some degree are fairly constant, though they fluctuate a little bit. It all depends on the markets and things of that nature. The more money that's in circulation, the more inflation, the less it becomes worth. Therefore, the more or the less it's worth. Okay, so each individual dollar becomes worth less the more dollars there are. Think of it like food. Okay, if I brought a pizza into class that had 12 slices and there were, 20 hungry people in there, that pizza and each slice of pizza would be worth a lot more because there wouldn't be enough for everybody. Where instead, if say I brought in 10 pizzas, there would be more than enough to go around. So if you were all hungry, you wouldn't be like, oh my gosh, I have to get to that pizza first to make sure I can get a piece, right? So look at inflation that way. The more money you pump into the economy, the more money you create, the more money you print, it makes every individual dollar worth less. Okay, so different figures have different numbers for the German inflation rate. Some will say it was only about 322%, which is incredibly high. A healthy inflation rate is somewhere, if it ever gets above 5%, people start to worry seriously. Some estimates say 322%. Basically what it boils down to, we say 4 trillion percent because based on the value of the American dollar, in other words, okay, with a 4 trillion percent inflation rate, one American dollar would have been worth 4 trillion Deutschmarks, or German money, right? Would have been worth 4 trillion German dollars. Okay, so all this means basically in 1923 is that the German money is essentially worthless. People literally would burn money as kindling for fires to stay warm. People would, if you wanted a loaf of bread, you'd have to take a wheelbarrow full of money into a bakery to be able to get that loaf of bread to be able to pay for it. You could walk around the streets, people walk the streets and see money laying everywhere and just wouldn't pick it up because it was literally worthless. So how do you switch that? How do you change that situation? Well, there's inflation and there's deflation. Deflation can be a bad thing too, but in this particular case, uh, the German economy or the German government, which was really bad during the 1920s, decided to help fix the economic conditions by printing more and more and more money. Well, one way to deflate the value of currency is to get rid of a lot of that money, actually take it up and burn it or whatever. Then you're low, then, the more you're able to do that, the less money there is, increasing the value of that particular item, right? It's like if there's a good that's very common to people and easy to get, it's worth less. But the less of it there is, if it's still popular, its value goes up. It's basic supply and demand. Look at things like hand sanitizer and toilet paper and all that stuff during the coronavirus, right? All of a sudden, the demand for those things that are usually very cheap went up, and then they become harder to find, and therefore, in some cases, more expensive. So German money here is worthless. Um, so the European countries and the United States was involved. We're looking at Germany and trying to figure out, okay, there's no way they're going to be able to pay the debts that they have to pay because of this war guilt clause. So we have to come up with another plan to help the German economy rebound, basically for selfish reasons, so they can pay us back, so they can pay all these European countries back. Okay, uh, so that is one of the big, big problems in Germany in the 1920s. Your economy is depressed, your country is a mess, your government is ineffective, and you got to find something new. Okay, so in the late 1920s, we slowly begin to see the recovery of the German economy. Um, we have, still an ineffective government, but naturally over time, as that money supply goes down, the value will go up and the economy starts to rebound. Unfortunately, in Germany, um, all the other European countries after World War II, they took the Kaiser out of power and they basically left the German country and economy and government for dead. So you get all these different groups that want to take power, and ultimately they settle on a group called the Weimar Republic, Weimar, the Weimar Republic, which was really an ineffective government with poor leadership and little ability to do much. And when you have an ineffective government or ineffective leadership, people are going to want change. Just like in the United States, a lot of people point at Herbert Hoover kind of unfairly as like the worst, kind of unfairly, as one of, if not, the worst presidents that we've ever had in the United States, because he was the guy that was president when the Great Depression started. Okay, now the things he tried to do to fix it were very ineffective, but whoever was president at that time probably would have been blamed for the depression. So we decided to change in 1932, and instead of reelecting Hoover, we elected Franklin Roosevelt president. Okay, so let's see how the struggle for power in Germany kind of um, began, right? So because of pretty much the failure of the Versailles Treaty to really effectively deal with Germany. Remember, those folks were really mad at Germany. They leave again Germany for dead. They figure out themselves. We're going to strip them of all ability to do anything, and then you say you're going to have to fix it on your own, right? It's like if somebody is, um, if you bring somebody to your house to fix something that's broken on your car, or maybe something, your heater or water cooler or whatever, or hot water tank, uh, and you tell them, well, you have to fix it, but you can't use any tools. Okay, well, it's probably not going to be a very effective job. Okay, so what happens in Germany is different groups of people seize an opportunity to take over in Germany, become influential and powerful. And because of that, We have a lot of different groups that are trying to institute power. One of them are Jewish people. Okay, actually, this is a big reason why later Hitler does the Holocaust, and we have what happens in Germany later on. I was telling you before how bad Germany's economy was in the 1920s. Well, German Jews managed to get through it okay, and a lot of people in Germany resented that. Um, and started to resent the Jewish people, and Hitler fed off that, and this is one of the things that leads to the Holocaust because while everybody in Germany is struggling mightily in the 1920s economically, Jewish people more or less are get out of the economic system in Germany a little bit more unscathed. We also see other religious groups trying to institute power in Germany. Catholic groups try to impose power and be more involved with and take over governments. Catholicism was really strong, obviously, in Italy because the Vatican is there, and Catholic groups trying to institute power in Germany during this time too. They're another group that, to a lesser degree, that Hitler, of course, goes after during the Holocaust. It wasn't just the Jewish people, but we'll talk about that later on. We see the communists try to get involved in Germany. See, that's what communists do. They see a government or a country that is weak and it needs new ideas, and they spend money and they go in there and they try to convert that country to communist causes. So there was a fair deal of communist influence in Germany in the 1920s too, trying to turn Germany into a communist country. We see social democrats, or people, they're called social democrats, but basically people trying to impose democracy in Germany. Um, Similar to what we have in the United States, right? They want a form of democracy to offer free voting and opportunity to people. So all these groups are trying to impose power during the Weimar Republic in the 1920s. And then, of course, at the end, the group that comes in and does find success are fascists or the Nazi Party. Okay, and I'll explain to you the difference between communism, fascism, and Nazism here shortly. Um, Now, what they were called, and this is where people get confused, is the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Okay, and then they shorten that to Nazis, National Socialist German Workers' Party. So you think it'd be associated with communism, but it's really not as much as you think, and um, I'll explain that here in a second. Okay, uh, so let's talk a little bit more about fascism. So in communism, if you had a political spectrum, I usually draw this up on the board for you. So we'll try to do that here. So if you have like a grid like you'd have in math, you got one side and the top and bottom here. If this side is the right, that's a terrible R, of course, and this is the left, right? So in our system in the United States, we have on the left, we have Democrats, and then of course on the right, we have Republicans, okay? Um, the extreme version of that, the extreme version of the left, are communists. That's why people say that people that are like left-wing people like Bernie Sanders and people like that, like, oh, they're communists, because they kind of are. And in communism, as we learned last week, the ideal thing is to everybody gets the same. The government takes care of you. You get, the government controls the economy, and everybody gets fair and equal opportunity. Okay, that's the extreme left. The extreme right, in other words, like right-wing extremists, tend to be called fascists. Now, in a fascist system, the government exercises a ton of control over, exercises a ton of control over what is produced, how much is produced. So it sounds communistic in a sense, but the difference is there's no limit on the amount of money that certain people can make. In other words, in an ideal communist system, um, everybody makes the same amount and everybody's equal and all that stuff. In the extreme fascist system, those chosen by the leaders, businessmen, people like that, can make a ton of money. There's no limit to how much they can make. The difference is what makes it different than what we have in the United States is the government chooses, ultimately says you're going to produce this, and you can make as much money as you want doing it, and it doesn't give you much choice in regards to that, right? Like if General Motors in the United States decided, we're not going to make cars anymore, they have every right to do that. If Ford decided we're not going to make cars anymore, if Apple decided we're not going to make iPhones anymore, they certainly could do that. But in a fascist system, it would be allowed. The leaders would say, no, you're going to make those phones, you're going to make those cars, and you don't have a choice. So we see fascist groups during the 1920s and 30s. Hopefully you understood what I was just talking about. We'll go over it a little bit more in class this week. But during the 20s and 30s, we see a lot of fascist groups rise to power throughout Europe. Again, just like the communists, fascist ideals rise up in countries that are undergoing significant political change, problems, and upheaval. Obviously, in Germany, you have the rise of Hitler in the 1930s, and we'll get into that more specifically with Hitler next time. What's the difference between fascism and Nazism? Okay, a lot of people wonder about that. Nazism is extreme fascism. Okay, fascism is really bad. Nazism is worse. Um, Nazism is everything fascism is, but then you also throw a significant component of racism uh, and hatred and things of that nature in there. So Nazism is like fascism, but we hate black people and we hate Jewish people and we hate basically anybody who doesn't fit the ideology of what a Nazi should be. Other fascist dictatorships, even before Hitler came to power in the 1920s, we had Mussolini take over Italy. Italy had a weak government and was tremendously weakened by World War One. Mussolini seized on the opportunity in 1922 and he overthrew the Italian king and became the dictator or the fascist leader of Italy. Just like in Germany, everybody called Hitler the Führer. In Italy, they called Mussolini Il Duce, Ilduce, the leader. Um, Another form of fascism emerged in the 1930s under a guy named Francisco Franco in Spain. They were not as involved really at all in just a little bit, but not much in the Second World War. But Franco's dictatorship in fascist dictatorship in Spain was very repressive. He killed a lot of his own people. A lot of Spanish, people were killed during this time, and they threw, the religious component of Catholicism in there. That everything from the state had to be Catholic. Another component of fascism, and we'll talk about this more next time, is how you have to have your component of racism. Some of the, or I'm not racism, of religion. Um, some say you have to be Catholic. If you're not Catholic, you could be imprisoned or killed. Some people say no, we can't have Catholicism. Other people want an atheist state that recognizes no religion, like the Soviet Union did. Okay, so it all depends on the leadership and who's in charge. What this makes is something that we call the modern totalitarian state. Totalitarianism is basically a concept where one person or one figure kind of controls everything within a country, from what people are allowed to do to what people believe to controlling the media. They usually do this through producing a lot of lies about themselves to kind of form a cult of personality around that person to make people believe that what they say is true and lead to some degree by fear. They often point out the media, make the mass media seem like the enemy. there's an enemy of the people, and that they can't be trusted, things of that nature. Totalitarian dictators are also typically um, people that control every aspect of their state or their government. Um, like in Soviet Union, they kill people who disagree with what they believe. They control the ways and means or what people can buy and own. They glorify the military. Okay, they put out lots of propaganda to support their ideologies. They often have, kind of big monitored events and gatherings where people where they give these rousing speeches and things like that get people really all bent out of shape about certain aspects of um, whatever the propaganda is that you're trying to promote. And I'll show you some Nazi propaganda here next time. Modern examples of totalitarian leaders would be like uh, Kim Jong Un from North Korea. Um, to a lesser degree, you see that from like a Vladimir Putin in Russia. But yeah, people like Mussolini, Stalin, Franco, and obviously Hitler were all big totalitarian leaders. Okay, they rule through a cult of personality and a culture of fear. And usually, after that leader is replaced, many of their ideologies and beliefs get repudiated and thrown aside. But these are all common things you see in fascist or totalitarian states, lots of propaganda to support their ideologies, lots of militarism or the glorification of military, lots of money being spent on stuff like that. Anyway, so we will stop there because this one went a little longer than I thought, and I will get this out to you soon. All right. Thanks, folks.